The proposal would call for 500% tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil. So we're talking primarily China and India, and that would have a devastating impact.
Now, from his seat in Air Force One on the way home from the Pope's funeral in Rome yesterday, President Trump posted a rare rebuke of Vladimir Putin on his Truth Social page. He questioned Putin's willingness to reach a peace deal in Ukraine, writing, "It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through, quotes, banking or, quote, secondary sanctions. Too many people are dying." That's the end of his post. So what more could the United States do? Well, joining us now is Stephanie Baker, author of Punishing Putin and Bloomberg senior writer. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Stephanie, banking, very loose term used there by President Trump, but I was under the impression that we had put banking sanctions on the Russian state, but that hasn't seemed to have done a lot in stopping banking transactions or the Russian state carrying on banking as it used to.
Well, you're right. More than 80%, close to 90% of the Russian banking sector is under sanctions. Now, there have been carve-outs for energy payments. Some of those could be closed to tighten the financial sanctions. Broadly speaking, the financial sanctions have been the most effective and have created payment problems for Russia across the board, and has forced it to try to come up with workarounds. It's forced it to rely on Chinese banks in particular. So secondary sanctions could be used against Chinese banks that do business with Russia. So there are a number of things that could be done to tighten the sanctions regime, in particular on cracking down on Russian oil exports, where there's still room to get tougher.
I mean, from what I've understood, some sectors have almost been helped by the banking sanctions because Russia has had to create its own internal payment system, which means they've had almost a developing industry within the country.
Well, that's not quite right. Russia started developing a domestic payment system as an alternative to SWIFT, this Gmail of international banking, and as an alternative to Visa and MasterCard. That was years ago, back in 2018, 2019. So it's been preparing for this moment for many years.
Right.
But the problems that have been created by the financial sanctions are enormous. Putin has complained about, the banking sanctions in particular. It was one of the conditions that he put sort of retroactively on the ceasefire in the Black Sea, that he said they had to lift sanctions on Russia's agricultural bank, so that it would enable payments for fertilizer and grain exports to flow more easily. Now, they have effectively found other workarounds, you're right, particularly China. But make no mistake, these are irritants to the Putin regime, and that is why he is demanding sanctions relief as a condition for any peace plan.
So what do you think are some of the options that Donald Trump has in his arsenal, should he go ahead with what he describes very loosely as banking or secondary sanctions?
Well, I think what he's referring to there is a proposal in the Senate, a bipartisan proposal of about 60 senators from both the Democrats and the Republicans to impose secondary tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil. This is something that was floated by Lindsey Graham, and he's come back and re-upped this plan. I think he's been talking to Trump about it. Now, this is a kind of merger of secondary sanctions and tariffs. It's never really been attempted before, but the proposal would call for 500% tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil. So we're talking primarily China and India, and that would have a devastating impact. I also think that they could go further in terms of sanctioning another major oil producer that they still have held off doing, Rosneft, state-controlled Rosneft, and that would have an impact. You now see oil prices that have come down, so there's room to go harder on Russian oil in a way that would not create too much economic pain through higher energy prices in the West.
I was just looking at the weekend's press. The Financial Times have been reporting that Apple have been moving their productions for mobile phones sold in the US from China to India. I mean, if then India gets hit by a 500% tariff, that's going to be a problem for Apple again, isn't it?
It will, but India has a choice of not buying Russian oil to avoid those tariffs, and that would be the objective of that policy. So that would effectively take a chunk of Russian oil off the market, and it would cause prices to go up. India is importing anywhere between 35 and 40% of its oil from Russia, so it would have to look for other suppliers. Russia is a major oil exporter. It accounts for about 10% of global production. So that has been the bugbear facing the sanctions coalition all along, is that they couldn't really hit Russia with really devastating sanctions without taking out oil from the global market. And that would in turn inflict pain on European and US consumers through higher prices at the pump. And I think that's been the real problem. It does seem that Trump doesn't care very much about economic fallout, as we've seen with his tariff policy. So he could go further. And it does sound like from his recent social media posts that he is getting frustrated. Putin is getting way out ahead of himself and is being overreaching in terms of pursuing aggressive, deadly attacks on civilian targets far from the front line in Kiev. It's obvious to anyone who's looking at this that he's not interested in peace. And it's as if he's giving a finger to Trump in his efforts to bring about a deal.
So do you think we are likely to see these secondary or banking sanctions? I mean, Donald Trump really would like this peace deal to be signed, done and dusted as quickly as possible, even as quickly as possible to fall within his first 100 days, although I think we're a bit pushing it for that. But do you think that we're going to see more ultimatums from Donald Trump?
We could. I mean, the problem with Trump is that he's very unpredictable. So far, he has been echoing Kremlin talking points. And the outlines of the deal that were reported in the media the other day as Trump's final proposal to both sides is a bad deal for Ukraine. It is basically rewarding Russia for a bloody land grab and extracting almost nothing in return. One of the key points of it is that the U.S. would lift all sanctions on Russia imposed since 2014, which is an enormous gift to Putin for getting almost nothing in return for just stopping the war at the current line of control. That deal included nothing about war reparations for Ukraine, rebuilding the damage to its critical infrastructure, its energy and power supplies. It said nothing about what would happen potentially to frozen Russian central bank assets. There are about $300 billion that are frozen in the West that could be used to rebuild Ukraine. So, there's a lot that needs to be negotiated, could be added to this deal. If Putin doesn't sign up, there is a possibility that Trump could hit back with harsher economic measures.
Stephanie, thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Stephanie Baker there, author of Punishing Putin and Bloomberg senior writer.